What is the function of self-deception?
Very interesting question. I mean, I don't know that there is one function. There are probably many different functions. So the most common way of understanding it is that we deceive ourselves so that we can more effectively deceive others. So you might think about a criminal who just committed a crime and is being interrogated. You might expect the criminal to be more convincing if the criminal actually believes his alibi. You know, there's a great line in Seinfeld. George Costanza says, "It's not a lie if you believe it." Of course, he's giving Jerry advice on how to beat a polygraph test in that scene. So the most common way of understanding it is as a way to more effectively convince or deceive others. I actually am kind of skeptical of that story about self-deception, mostly because humans are actually pretty crappy at detecting when other people are lying. So polygraph tests are actually famously unreliable. If you actually study people and bring them into the lab and have them try to guess whether someone's lying or telling the truth, they're actually pretty bad at it. They're not much better than just random chance. And so I'm skeptical that the ability to detect others' lies would have been a powerful enough selection pressure to lead to self-deception in order to effectively deceive others. What I think self-deception is more about is being able to persuade or bullshit others more effectively. So there's a difference between lying and bullshitting, and that lying, you know that you're telling a falsehood. But when you bullshit, you don't necessarily know what's true or not. You could be completely ignorant. I could be running my mouth and pretending to know what I'm talking about just to sound smart or to impress you. Or I could be trying to convince you of something. I could be trying to apologize or gain forgiveness from you. In those cases, my goal is social. I'm trying to gain status. I'm trying to gain sympathy. I'm trying to gain attention, but I'm not trying to accurately reveal reality to you. So my motivation is not to reveal the truth to you, but to get something from you. So that is bullshit. Bullshitting is communicating without regard for the truth, without caring about the accuracy of what you're saying. And so I think instead of deceiving ourselves to better deceive others, I think we bullshit ourselves to better bullshit others. Just as a prosecuting attorney might practice their opening statement in front of a mirror, I think we often rehearse the arguments that we're going to give to other people in advance of the social trials we face in everyday life. So if I'm constantly rehearsing arguments for why I'm a good person and why I'm great, I'm going to be much more prepared when you challenge me and call me a bad person. I'll have a list of reasons and excuses that make me look good. And so I think one of the reasons we try to convince ourselves that we're good people is so that when we're confronted or accused of something further down the line, we'll be better able to defend ourselves. We'll have a long list of excuses. We'll have a long list of rehearsed monologues that we'll be able to deliver effectively. And so I think that is largely the function of what we would call self-deception.
So to pick up on this idea of if you believe it, it's not a lie, is that the case with bullshit? You can sort of bullshit your way through the bullshit to the point of it actually manifesting in reality and becoming true.
Yeah, so I think believing your own bullshit will make you more effective in the sense that if you're trying to convince someone and you come up with a list of reasons for why what you're saying is true, say you accused me of, say, hurting someone. I might come up with a list of reasons for why actually they had it coming. They were being an asshole. They deserved to get hit in the face, or maybe I didn't know. Maybe I was just, I bumped into them by accident. I'll have a bunch of excuses that are designed to convince you to exonerate me. But the thing is, I'm not going to look for the other side of the story. I'm not going to look for evidence that the guy actually was innocent, or that he didn't have it coming, or that anything that might make me look bad. I'm going to ignore in my zeal to convince you that I'm actually a good guy. So the selective pursuit of evidence can be a way of more effectively bullshitting the person, because you're only looking for one side of the story. And if I only know one side of the story, then that's the only side of the story I'm going to tell to you, and that's the only side of the story you are going to hear. And that makes me more convincing in presenting that side of the story if it's not contaminated by this other side of the story that makes me look bad.
It seems like this is almost a necessity for progress in life. And it's something I've been thinking about for a long time is, do you need to bullshit yourself to extraordinary levels to achieve extraordinary things? Because when the stakes are higher, statistically speaking, the probability is lower that you will achieve insert thing. Is there a correlation with ambition and excessive bullshit required to achieve those things?
There might be. So there is a lot of research on what's called overconfidence. So when I am more confident that I'm right than I should be. So you can measure this by giving people like a survey of trivia questions, and then they rate what they think the right answer is, and then they rate how confident they are that that answer is right. And then you can measure the discrepancy between how confident they are and how likely they are to actually be correct. And insofar as I'm more confident than I should be, like if let's say I say I'm 90% confident in this, but 50% of the time I end up being right, that would be me being overconfident, right? And so there's evidence that people who are overconfident gain some social rewards, that people are more prone to follow them, to respect them. They gain, status and esteem. They look more competent insofar as they're overconfident. So it could be one strategy for gaining status, but I wouldn't say it's a foolproof strategy because it can backfire. There's also research showing that if I say I'm confident about something, let's say, I think that lightning is going to strike in the next 5 seconds, and I'm really confident about that. Well, if lightning doesn't strike, I'm going to look like an idiot, right? But if I just say maybe lightning will strike, then it's not going to cost me that much if I'm wrong. So we often we judge people more harshly when they're wrong if they were confidently wrong than if they were unconfidently wrong. So being overconfident is a kind of risky strategy. So you open yourself up to humiliation if you end up being wrong. But on the other side of things, people will be more motivated to follow you, to join you. They're going to think you're more confident. So it's kind of a toss-up. I would say it's a risky strategy to be overconfident. It's risky to bullshit yourself. Certainly it can pay off in some cases. In other cases, you might end up failing spectacularly. So I wouldn't give advice one way or the other. I think it depends on your circumstances.
I want us to dive straight into the deep end here.
Mm-hmm.
We've got this problem of induction going on where nothing can ever actually be proved based on the presented evidence.
Okay.
We can think that the sun is going to rise tomorrow because it's risen every day so far in our lives and in history, yet we can't support that. Mm-hmm. We can't actually quantifiably prove that.
Yeah.
So I want us to get some bedrock here early on. The fact that we can't prove anything for sure 100% with this problem of induction that David Hume discusses, is it the case that everything is bullshit?
I think everything is bullshit in the sense that we often, or nearly always, have some ulterior motive that is non-epistemic or non-related to the truth. So we are a social species, and I'm constantly trying to impress you, gain status, gain sympathy, et cetera, et cetera. And those motives are going to color the things that I say and the pieces of information I reveal to you. So in that sense, everything is bullshit, and that there's almost always some other motive present that is separate from truth-seeking, and those separate motives will often contaminate and bias the types of things I say, and even in some cases, the types of things I believe. So that's the sense in which I think everything is bullshit. It's very different from the way a philosopher might construe, say, epistemic nihilism, where nothing can be known. I don't think that everything is bullshit in that sense. So I am a scientist. I use the scientific method to shed light on the human mind. I don't think science is bullshit when it's working well. I think science is our best means of uncovering what is true. And yes, I buy Hume's argument that you can never prove to 100% certainty that, say, the sun is going to come up tomorrow. I do think that when you look at the sweep of history and the sweep of scientific progress, it's pretty undeniable to say that, those people aren't doing something right, right? They got to the moon, they built vaccines, they put satellites in orbit around the Earth. These ideas are clearly very powerful. And when I think about what is quote unquote true, if it's not going to actually increase my efficacy in the world, if it's not going to help me do things like, build technology, put people on the moon, then I don't really care about it. So really, I think truth is either the type of truth that scientists discover, or I don't care about it. And so I define truth in terms of, loosely, the stuff that scientists do, the stuff that scientists talk about, the stuff that scientists make progress on. And I think that way of understanding truth is really the only way of understanding truth that, makes sense for us to care about.
Unpack that for me a bit further. Why does it only make sense to care about that?
Well, if knowing the truth is not going to change my life in any way, if it's not going to benefit me in any way, then what good is it? Right? And so the only kind of truth I care about is truth that makes a difference in the world. And we already know that science has a good track record of making a difference in the world, of giving people more power to influence the world. And so whatever it is that allows scientists to have more and more influence over the world and have greater and greater understanding of the world and make more and more fine-grained predictions about what is going to happen. Whatever that thing is, that's the thing I care about, and that's the thing I think we should care about. And I see no reason not to call that truth.
I guess what you're opening yourself up to there is the fact that you, David, think that thing is useful based on certain presuppositions that you are coming at the argument with. What would be some of the trade-offs to that approach to truth?
I don't think there are. I mean, every human being has desires, has motivations, has, ways they want to influence the world. And so if you are a human being and you have desires and you have cares, well, then the truth is necessarily going to help you achieve your goals. It's going to help you get what you want, right? I don't think anyone can not care about the truth, because anyone who is a person has things they care about. And truth, by definition, is the thing that helps you get what you care about, helps you protect the things you care about, and helps you achieve your goals. So in that sense, I don't really see a downside to it. I don't really see any alternative understanding to truth that makes any sense or is worth caring about.
It's fascinating speaking about truth necessarily leading you towards your goals in life. Do you think that's sound, or can there not be very inconvenient truths that obstruct the way we want to live a flourishing life?
Yeah, there could be, dangerous truths or depressing truths that might be harmful. There are lots of people who, they might not want to know if they have, a gene that's going to give them Alzheimer's, say at, age 70. They might just want to live in blissful ignorance of that fact. Other people might want to know. They might want to make preparations for the fact that they're going to develop Alzheimer's at one age. There are all sorts of strategic reasons why we might not want to know certain things. There might be moral reasons why we might not want to know certain things. So if I know all of the horrible conditions that animals are raised in factory farms, that might make it really hard for me to enjoy a cheeseburger. And if I want to enjoy a cheeseburger, I might choose to not avail myself of that information. I might choose to not watch the documentary that shows you what's going on inside of a factory farm. And so there are all sorts of reasons why we might not want to know things, and where the truth could interfere with our goals. I mean, politics itself is all about, trying to find the truths that advance the interests of our political coalition and covering up or denying or downplaying the truths that thwart the interests of our political coalition. So politics is all about what kinds of truths are useful to us and what kinds of truths are not useful to us. But still, I'm making the gambit that in general, across humanity in general, it is good to know true things, right? Yeah, there might be some exceptions. There might be some cases where it's better not to know. But I think as a curious person, as a person who has seen the sweep of human history and scientific progress and seen how the human condition has been enhanced by the advance of knowledge, I generally think that as a rule of thumb, truth is good, and it's good to know how things really work.
It fascinates me, this shift towards this epistemological nihilism that you've outlined.
Yeah.
And I see it especially in Gen Z and people my age, including myself. I find that we're all searching for some sort of bedrock constantly whilst refuting the existence of one.
Yeah.
And I've spoken to a few different people about this in the philosophy space. The impact that René Descartes left on the Western mind from the 17th century, how he places the individual at the center of the universe through his I think, therefore I am.
Yeah.
He keeps on doubting until he can't doubt the fact that he is doubting. I'm thinking, therefore I exist is probably a better translation of this thing. But with that, you discard everything else because probabilistically it could be false. It could be a delusion, but you know at least that you exist. So my point is, I think there are dangers that have come with this almost revival of this Cartesian school of thought, and I think it's linked to liberalism and progressivism that we've seen in the last few years, where the individual takes priority and therefore truth takes the back seat. We don't know what could be true other than our own desires.
Got it.
Therefore, we prioritize our desires.
So you're talking about ideas relating to, say, postmodernism, or the phrase, it's my truth, where it's true for me or it's true for one culture, but it might not be true with a capital T. Is that the sort of thing you're talking about? Yeah. I mean, I agree that that way of thinking is corrosive. I think we need a common reality for us to live in and for us to share if we are to work together to improve our lot. I think the phrase "my truth," I think, is a kind of solipsism that is corrosive to cooperation and mutual betterment. I think we need to agree on what is if we are going to chart a path forward. And if we can't have that agreement, then we're just going to kill each other, right? And so I view truth or common understanding as the bedrock for mutual cooperation and our main way of avoiding violence and conflict.
Are you religious?
No, I'm not.
What do you think to something like Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism? This idea that if evolution is true, we are not optimized for the pursuit of truth, rather things that keep us alive. Therefore, naturalism is this kind of self-refuting concept.
Yeah, I don't buy that argument because there are many cases where knowing what's true is the best way to survive and reproduce. If there's a lion chasing me, it really is going to improve my survival prospects if I am aware of that truth. If 3 bears go into a cave and 2 come out, it's really going to benefit my survival if I am aware that there is still 1 bear in the cave and I know that fact and I don't go in the cave as a result. So there are all sorts of areas where knowing the truth is going to increase your survival and reproduction. And it is that reason why we have faculties of reasoning, of perception, that allow us to know that the lion is racing toward us, or that the fire is lit, or that our spouse has cheated on us. These are things that are really good to know from a Darwinian perspective, and it would be very bad to be mistaken or deceived about those things. And I think for that reason, we have evolved an aversion to being lied to being bullshitted, to being manipulated. We have what the psychologist Hugo Mercier has called epistemic vigilance. We are vigilant against people lying to us and manipulate us. And I think that too can be understood in Darwinian terms. So I don't buy this idea that evolution does not lead to truth tracking cognitive systems. So yeah, I don't think that argument gets off the ground. Yeah.
I guess there's this balance between believing that there are 3 lions still in the cave, so that you're extra safe and don't get killed in the eventuality that the one comes out and attacks you. It's a much safer option to think that the rustling in the bushes is a mammal that's going to eat you rather than a little bird. So there's that balance there of paralysis from overprotection versus dying from underprotecting yourself with bullshit.
Yeah, so that's a really great point. So this refers to what's known as error management theory, that if the world is uncertain and we're bound to make mistakes or errors, it is better to make the less costly error than to make the more costly error. So if there's any uncertainty about whether there's a bear in the cave, it might be better for me to just assume that there's a bear there because, it is much less costly for me to avoid going in the cave than for me to go in the cave and get eaten by a bear, right? And so this might lead to the evolution of things like paranoia. It's better for me to assume that people are out to get me because I'm going to be more vigilant against people being out to get me and avoid that fate. It might lead to things like overconfidence in some cases. If I am deluded about my own abilities, my own formidability, my own status, that might win me various social rewards. So, yeah, that's possible. But I would still say that there are certain domains where truth is going to be selected for. And there may also be some exceptions to that rule where truth is going to be selected against. But all I need to maintain is that there are at least some systems in the mind whose job it is to track reality. And I think those systems are responsible for scientific progress, for intellectual progress. And all I need to say is that we should rely on those systems for figuring out what's true and what's not.
It's interesting seeing how this plays out in the modern world, especially now where the average American has less than $1,000 in the bank account. They're overweight, like diagnosed by doctors as obese, and they're scared to pursue their dreams on the whole. They're stuck in jobs that they don't want to do. It feels like now having a big delusion accounts for much more than ever. And again, like, I'm only 20, push back on this if this is complete bullshit.
Yeah.
But it seems comparatively to looking back in the past, it's a lot more beneficial now to be deluded because the resources are in excess and they're there to be snapped up by the person who has enough confidence to do it. So I guess what I'm positing is the confident person or deluded person is going to be way more successful now than in a time 100 years ago where we had rigid social structures and the confident person just got shot down and kept at bay by those structures in place.
Maybe. I mean, at the same time, you could make the opposite argument that there have never been more ways for an overconfident person to collide with reality and get shot down. If we we live in a market economy where the only way to survive is to provide goods and services to other people that they value. And at the end of the day, if I think I'm providing more valuable goods than I actually am providing, no one's going to buy my goods. If I think my services are more valuable than they actually are, or are in higher demand than they actually are, well, no one's going to buy my services. If I'm trying to run a business and I have wacky ideas about how to run a business, my business is going to fail. And so businesses need to be very attentive to reality or they're going to go under. And so because we live in such a intricate global economy with so many layers of division of labor and specialization, it may be the fact that we are more vulnerable to getting our delusions punctured than we ever have been before. So I would caution against encouraging people to be deluded about how wonderful they are or how likely they are to succeed. The fact is, we live in a very competitive economy. And if you're entering a competitive industry, like, say, starting a podcast, going into acting or music or the arts, where there are lots of people who want to be the next big thing, statistically speaking, you have a very low likelihood of success. And I would only recommend going into one of those competitive industries if you have good reason to think that you are truly unique, that you are truly talented or are truly offering something that is not being offered by anyone else. And if you have no reason to think that, I would caution against going into such a competitive industry. I think there's a lot of danger in exaggerating and paying too much attention to the success stories that we see on social media. So we're only going to see the stories of people who win big in the economy, the millionaires and billionaires, the rock stars, the podcast stars. We're not going to see the millions of failed podcasts, the millions of failed rock stars, the millions of failed actors, because those people just aren't interesting, and they're not, they don't capture our attention the way the success stories capture our attention. And so if we're only seeing the successes and we're not seeing the failures, we're getting a very biased picture of how the world works. And we might be inclined to overestimate our probability of being one of those successes because the successes are all we ever see. And so I almost want to convey the opposite message that has been conveyed to young people by a lot of self-help gurus. I think that we have too much confidence. And I think that we ought to instead embrace the virtue of humility.
I wonder if it's the thing of all success stories being deluded, but not all deluded people being success stories.
Yes.
And this bugs me with the whole saying of fake it till you make it. The amount of times I've been told this in my career. Before this, I was producing podcasts and people would say, fake it till you make it. Just keep on pretending that you know, to your employers, to the acquaintances that you're meeting, and they'll put you on a pedestal, they'll give you better roles, and voila, you're a success story. I really want to try hard to rail against that, because that is when reality slaps you in the face.
Yeah.
And as someone that's been pretty ambitious from an early age, and I have had, I don't know if delusion is the right word, perhaps not, but I've certainly had faith in abilities that weren't presently there based on evidence. I'm always cautious of taking that next step to fake it till you make it and actively lie and become in conflict with reality. So I'm fine with believing in stories about my future and what is going to happen, but as soon as they actively disregard any evidence in front of me, I do not want to believe that, because that's how I run into a brick wall face first. What role does truth and not lying play in all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to say that no one should be ambitious. I think we should be reasonably ambitious. We should be ambitious in a way that is justified by all of the evidence we've been exposed to about our abilities and about the marketplace of competitors in which we find ourselves. So if I have evidence that I'm really good at, say, basketball, and I continually outcompete everyone I've played against, I get lots of compliments from people about how great I am am objectively very tall, I wouldn't want to discourage a person like myself to go try to become a basketball player. In that case, you have a lot of evidence that you might be unusually likely to succeed in that career. But if I'm a short guy, if I'm asthmatic, and I constantly lose at basketball, it would be very bad if a self-help guru told me to go try to play for the NBA. That's just not going to be realistic for someone like me. And so I think it is extremely important to pay attention to the facts on the ground, even when those facts are hard to acknowledge. Not everyone is going to play for the NBA. Only a small number of people are suited to that career. Not everyone is going to be a rock star or a famous actor. So I would just take a cold, hard look at yourself in the mirror and be honest with yourself about what your various assets and liabilities are. And we all have assets and liabilities. We all have strengths and weaknesses. And I think the best way to make the best decision for ourselves is to be open and honest about those weaknesses and strengths. It is easy to go too far in one direction. You can focus too much on your weaknesses while ignoring your strengths. That is a bad direction to go into. You can be narcissistic and focus too much on your strengths and not enough on your weaknesses. I think the key to making good decisions is hitting that sweet spot and being realistic about the kind of person you are and the kind of world you live in.
You can't fake it till you make it into the NBA if you're 5'2".
Yes.
Something I've been thinking about a lot is, and I'd be interested to hear just your thoughts on this framework. Perhaps it's not useful, but what I've been telling myself a lot recently is accept the limitations of your biology.
Yep.
Okay, now anything is possible.
Well, I wouldn't say anything is possible. Some things are going to be more likely than others. I don't think it's possible for someone like me to play for the NBA.
But that's the limitations of your biology, I suppose.
I suppose. But if you think about it, like, what is outside of our biology? Like, at the end of the day, we're animals. Like, we have brains that are products of natural selection. Those brains have certain emotions and intuitions and personality traits and cognitive abilities. Like, that's all part of our biology. Like, who we are is a part of our biology. So what isn't a biological limitation at the end of the day? And so it just comes back to the question of, like, what do you have good reason to believe about yourself and about the world you live in, and try to make the best decisions you can with the knowledge you have.
I'd love to pick your brains, and apologies for all of these big sweeping questions.
No, I love them.
Are very vague, but I think you're the right man to ask. A framework that I picked up when I was producing the Trigonometry podcast, and Konstantin had just gotten back from touring with Jordan Peterson, was this idea of the consequences of truth versus the consequences of lies. And the way that Jordan Peterson thinks about truth and lies is that every single lie you tell is a step towards hell on earth, whatever that means for you. So you don't necessarily have to believe in the divine, but the whole Sam Harris thing of imagine the worst possible suffering. That's your hell on earth. Every lie is a step towards that because you're opening up a branch of eventualities that take you away from the truth, right? And that takes you towards the hell on earth. Whereas what I've tagged onto that is every truth, and every time you give 100% towards something is a step towards your heaven on earth. So for me, what I've found works well and is very effective so far is prioritizing truth at all costs. And most of all, if you're not going to tell the truth, don't lie.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would like more truth in the world than there currently is now. I think at the margin, right now, truth is good. I think we need more respect for truth, not less. But I wouldn't go so far as to say that it is the pinnacle of human life, or that it's the only thing that matters, or we should throw everything out the door in our quest for truth. I think there are different things that have value to us, and we need to make trade-offs between different things of value. I think it is possible to be too brutally honest in a way that is going to alienate you from the people you love. We need to tell a lot of white lies just to have stable social relationships with each other. If we're constantly insulting our friends by being brutally honest with them, that's going to damage our relationships. A lot of our social life is built on these kinds of fictions. You know, if I don't want to go to your party, I'm not going to tell you the truth and say that this party seems lame, or I don't like you that much. I'm going to make up an excuse. I'm sick, or, you know, I had to take my dog to the vet, or I'm, you know, whatever. Any number of excuses. I think we have to give these excuses. We have to tell these white lies if we're going to have good relationships with each other. So I wouldn't advise people to be 100% brutally honest in every aspect of their lives. Should they be more, you know, a bit more honest than they otherwise would be? Sure. Should we care a bit more about truth than we currently care about it? Sure. But there are limits, and I wouldn't want to preach any kind of monomaniacal search for truth, or any kind of extremism or dogmatism where everything else gets thrown out the window.
You've mentioned that it's very hard to see when someone is deceiving you.
Yeah.
What's easier, seeing when someone's deceiving you, or seeing when you're deceiving yourself?
I would say that it's much easier to see when someone is deceiving you or bullshitting you than it is to see when you are deceiving or bullshitting yourself. And I think the reason is that there are huge Darwinian benefits to detecting when other people are trying to deceive you or manipulate you or exploit you. But there are no Darwinian benefits to seeing when you're trying to exploit yourself. In fact, there are Darwinian benefits for not knowing that, because it makes you more effective in manipulating and exploiting other people. So for evolutionary reasons, I would expect us to be much better at spotting bullshit in other people, in seeing the log in other people's eyes, than we are at seeing the specks in our own eyes. Or sorry, I got that backwards. It was the log in our own eye and the speck in other people's eyes. Anyway, continue. Yeah.
Are there any easy, low-hanging fruits to snap up of being able to spot deception, even though it may be difficult? Are there certain signals that people give off when they are bullshitting you?
I mean, I think we already do this intuitively, but I would just constantly ask the question, does this person have an ulterior motive that is plausible? Is there a reason why what they're telling me is in their interests? If I'm at a used car lot, obviously the car salesman has an incentive to tell me all of the positive attributes of the car while hiding all of the negative attributes of the car. So I think just having that kind of social common sense of what are people's agendas, what are people's interests, and knowing or having a healthy understanding of the ways in which those agendas will bias what they're telling you. So I would just focus on people's motives and focus on the ways in which those motives will bias what they're trying to tell you. And I think in that sense, I think having a healthy dose of cynicism can be helpful because our motives are often darker and uglier and more selfish than we let on. And if we are clear and honest about other people's unflattering motives, we're going to have a better sense of the ways in which what they're telling us is biased by those motives. Politics is a great example in which I think we could use more cynicism and less idealism. I think politics is usually framed as the pursuit of high-minded idealistic goals that are often very different from the goals that are actually being pursued by politicians and by the people who vote for them. Often in politics, we say that we're pursuing the good of the nation, the good of humanity. We want to make the world a better place. I think we ought to take a more cynical perspective on what goes on in politics, to see it as a competition for control over the coercive apparatus of the state, the ability to literally force people to do things by threat of imprisonment. It is, in the Darwinian sense, a dominance contest, that whoever gains control over the coercive apparatus is dominant in a sense, and we all have a very strong reason to compete over that apparatus and form coalitions and alliances where we spread each other's propaganda in order to increase our own power and our own status in that competitive world. So I think we ought to be more cynical about politics. And we need to be aware of the fact that if a person is a loyalist toward one side or another, or toward one ideology or another, they have a very strong motive to bias the things that they're telling you. They have a very strong motive to present a one-sided story, to present all the evidence for their ideology and completely ignore, dismiss, or sweep under the rug evidence for any other perspective. So I think being more cynical about politics and political narratives is an especially good way to guard yourself against bullshit.
This is so fucking fascinating to break the fourth wall. This is so much fun. I love this more than anything. Show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. What does that mean to you?
Well, I think of an incentive as just something that we as human primates evolved to want. Usually people think of money as an incentive. I would view money as an indirect incentive. I don't think we evolved an appetite for money because money was not available in ancestral environments, but we want money because it buys us the things that we do want, like status or resources. So I would just view incentives as things in the world that we want, and incentive structures are, the obstacles that are in the way of us and the things we want. And so as soon as you understand what the basic incentives are of the world we live in, where they are situated in time and space, that allows you to predict a whole lot about what is going to happen. If certain things are incentivized, you can expect those things to happen. If certain things are not incentivized, you can expect those things not to happen. So yeah, I think being realistic and appropriately cynical about the things we want is a very good way to guard yourself against bullshit and to predict how things will play out. I have a post called Incentives Are Everything, where I basically lay out this way of thinking. And it's very different from our intuitive way of thinking, where we understand the world through stories with heroes and villains. I think that's sort of the opposite way of understanding the world to a mechanistic, incentive-based understanding. of the world. And there are all sorts of bullshit reasons why these narratives help advance our interests more than a mechanistic incentive-based understanding of the world. But yeah, I think asking yourself, what are the incentives? What do people want? How are they getting them? What is rewarded? What is punished? That gets you a really long way toward understanding how the world around you works.
I thought it would give me a more mechanistic view on the world, embracing that incentives are everything, but I don't feel that way. And I wonder if that's an evolutionary byproduct, sort of delude me. Same as what I would posit as our belief in our delusion potentially of free will. It's effective because otherwise, if you view things too mechanistically, it wouldn't play out. You wrote in Incentives Are Everything about Steven Pinker being ambushed with the following question: how does the brain work? 5 words or less. Talk to me about that.
I believe his answer to that question, which he delivered amazingly on the spot, with only a slight pause: nerve cells fire in patterns. And I found that to be an impressive ability to legitimately answer what seemed like an impossible question, which is to describe how the brain works in 5 words or less. And I strive toward that kind of pithiness and insightfulness to communicate the most possible information in the fewest possible words. And so in that post, Incentives Are Everything, I posed myself a similar question, which is, how does society work in 5 words or less? And the answer that I fantasized about giving was behavior is determined by incentives. And again, it just goes back to this way of thinking. It's an evolutionary way of thinking. And in order to understand what our incentives are, we need to understand our evolutionary history as hypersocial primates. I see no other way of figuring out what we ultimately want in the world, because I think if anything has evolved by natural selection, it is our deepest motivations. And so I see no way of understanding what our deepest motivations are except in terms of evolutionary theory. And so once we take the evolutionary perspective into account to say that we want things like sex and status and power and yummies and acceptance and approval by other people, we can just ask ourselves, well, where are these goodies situated in the world, and what are the strategies we use to get them? And how is society structured in such a way as to put those goodies closer to us or further away from us? So that is ultimately the incentive-based way of understanding things.
George Mack writes about this, how New Year's resolutions have a 91% failure rate. And that's because people are running off of motivation. It's fleeting, it's temporary, and ultimately it's reliant on your current mood, not the bigger picture of things. Motivation goes away after a couple of days, and you stop going to the gym even though you purchased a gym membership on January the 1st. The next level up from that is discipline. It's doing things in patterns and routines, even though you might not necessarily want to do it. Or at least, on a surface level, you don't emotionally feel like doing it that day. But you recognize the greater good. That's still not as effective as incentives, and aligning everything you do with the fundamental incentives at play.
With there, I would just view that in terms of conflicting incentives. So we have the immediate incentive of, say, eating the chocolate cake, and we have the long-term incentive of, say, wanting to be thin, and those incentives clash. And which one wins out in the theater of consciousness is ultimately going to depend on the strength of which one.
So I suppose it's going from the incentive of the chocolate cake to the incentive of something like putting on your Instagram that you are going on a 60-day diet and you're doing it to raise money for kids with cancer. Suddenly, that chocolate cake becomes a whole lot less appealing.
Yes, exactly. As soon as you have staked your social reputation on not eating the chocolate cake, it becomes much easier to not eat the chocolate cake. If you're going to be humiliated as a bad person for eating that chocolate cake, all of a sudden you're going to find the motivation to resist it. What you have done is you have added another incentive on top of the pre-existing incentive, which is a social incentive. And that is often a very effective way to get us to do things, to motivate us to do things. I would recommend, if people are struggling to motivate themselves to do things that they know are in their best interests, to harness the power of social incentives, commit to a course of action publicly, increase the costs of backing out on that action. Because if you promise to do things in public and you fail to follow through, you're going to look bad. And that is going to give you an extra push to actually follow through on the behavior.
What are some of the other strongest incentives we can put in front of ourselves?
Well, I think social incentives are probably the strongest incentives that we have as hypersocial animals. Our survival and reproduction depends crucially on our relationships with other people. We literally could not survive without the various collaborations and relationships we have with other people. Literally everything that is in front of us, the table that we're using, the microphones that we're using, the food that we put in our bodies, all of that has been brought to us by chains of cooperation and division of labor, of people working together, of social relationships where people communicate and organize themselves and have expectations about what should be done when and what the goal is and whether they've succeeded or failed in that goal. This is all complex social cognition that has allowed us to even be here, to be alive in this moment. So I think that social incentives are probably the strongest incentives we have. It's hard for me to even think about a stronger incentive than our peers either admiring us or looking down on us. I think people have killed for social status and esteem. They have died for social status and esteem. Many of us would rather die than to be viewed as, say, a pedophile or a rapist, right? To be completely excluded or shunned from society is, to many people, a fate worse than death. So it is hard to imagine an incentive stronger than that.
So putting the sort of self-development, self-helpy bro cap on here, I wonder if there's a formula. We can't quantify this, but this would be fun to workshop here. Something like the passing on of your genes. That's going to be a pretty fucking strong incentive and desire. Are there ways of implementing incentives into your life based on that to make sure you do the tasks you need to do?
So I would actually disagree. I don't think that we have a motivation to pass on our genes per se. I think we have a motivation to do the sorts of things and achieve the sorts of objectives that would have passed on our genes in ancestral environments. But those are going to be very different from the things that pass on our genes in the current environment. If I was monomaniacally focused on passing on my genes, if that was my true ultimate motivation, then I would spend all my time donating to sperm banks, right? If you think about it from a Darwinian perspective, I get to sire a bunch of children. I don't have to invest anything in those children. I don't have to pay for anything. What an amazing strategy from a Darwinian perspective for me to spread my genes.
Yeah.
And yet, we don't have sperm bank wars. We don't have wars between men that are fighting over the privilege to donate to a sperm bank, which is what you might expect from a naive Darwinian perspective. But I think that perspective is naive. We need to think more clearly about the types of motivations that are likely to evolve by natural selection. And I think a desire for fitness itself is not the type of thing that can evolve. It's actually useless because if I make a decision that lowers my fitness, by the time I learn whether it increased or decreased my fitness, I'm going to be long dead and incapable of regretting it. So what fitness is a mathematical abstraction. It's your genetic representation in future gene pools. And that's not something I can learn about in real time, right? It's a property of future generations. It's not a property that I can see or hear or feel right now. So making decisions in terms of this mathematical abstraction of fitness is just impossible. The only thing we can do is make decisions in terms of real things in the world, like food or sex or praise from high-status people. Status itself we have to infer from all sorts of social cues, from ways they're treating us, from benefits that they confer on us or costs that they inflict on us. it's extremely complicated to solve these challenges and to figure out whether we're high status, whether we're well-fed or whatever. And we've evolved complicated sensory and cognitive systems for knowing whether I'm hungry or thirsty, or whether I'm being socially excluded, whether I'm being miffed or insulted by people in my peer group, whether I need to be envious of my rival or whether I don't need to be. These are really complicated questions that our huge brains evolved to answer.
What do you think to something like the Matthew McConaughey approach, where he speaks about how his ideal person, his dream character, is him in 10 years' time? So he's constantly chasing this person. He gets asked at 15 who he wants to be, or whatever age it is. He says, me at 25. And then the person comes back to him at 25 and they go, so are you your dream person now? He goes, no. My dream person's 35. So he's always chasing this thing. But that doesn't seem to me to play on this social incentives piece, at least directly. It's more about fulfilling his own potential and living up to his own dream of himself. And I feel this too myself, not to ask you to therapize me or psychoanalyze me too much, but I've constantly felt this internal validation that I want to prove to myself rather than to conform to any social incentives per se. And perhaps I do want to do that, but less directly. But for me, I feel like that's protected me from a lot more. Believing in myself that I have a certain potential and capacity and trying to fulfill that rather than just outsourcing all of my incentives to the social ones.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I love to think about and that I've written a lot about is the paradoxical nature of our social incentives. And so obviously we've talked about status as one of the most powerful incentives there is. But what's paradoxical about status is that we don't like status seekers. We lower the status of people who are trying to gain status. We have all sorts of negative words that we use to describe status seekers. Assholes, douchebags, posers, narcissists, virtue signalers, attention whores,
Clout chasers.
Yeah, exactly.
Grifters.
Yes, exactly. Thank you for providing the more contemporary jargon for an old timer like me. Yeah, we have all sorts of terms that are designed to disparage and lower the status of status seekers. And so this is a really weird and convoluted social incentive. And the incentive is this: we must somehow seek status without being a status seeker. That's a really hard thing to do. Because in pursuing status, if we do it too overtly, then our goal gets thwarted, right? And so I think, to return to our conversation on self-bullshitting, self-deception, we often bullshit ourselves about our true motives. I think insofar as pursuing status is icky, is seen as selfish or narcissistic, we don't want to believe that that's our goal. But the interesting thing is that denying that that's our goal, in fact, achieves our goal. That doing things that signal to others that we're not interested in status or we don't care what they think, in fact, increases our status and makes them think more highly of us, right? So in terms of doing these mental gymnastics, I am skeptical that we have desires for, say, authenticity or self-actualization. What's interesting about authenticity is that it's socially rewarded. So we have this idea of authenticity, that you're doing something that's true to you and not what society wants you to be, right? But the thing is, society wants you to be the person who is true to you and not what society wants you to be, right? At the end of the day, society ultimately wants you to be that thing. So is that authenticity? No, I don't think it is. I think it's just a more convoluted kind of status seeking. There's also interesting research by Jamie Krems, who you had on, asking people what they mean by the term self-actualization. So she brought undergraduates into the lab. She asked them, what does self-actualization mean to you? And the answers they gave were basically indistinguishable from the answers they'd give if they were asked what is high status. They say, oh, I want to make 7 figures. I want to be the CEO of a major company. I want to be a famous novelist and write the great American novel. I want to have a 4.0 GPA. I want to have a PhD from Harvard. These are the sorts of answers people gave when they were asked what self-actualization means to them. Sounds a lot like a more socially palatable way of saying status.
So reading between the lines here, it seems like you don't believe in effective altruism.
Yes and no. I like effective altruism. I'm a fan of effective altruism. I think it is better to donate to effective charities than ineffective charities. At the same time, I am more cynical about effective altruists' motives than perhaps effective altruists would be. So they are claiming that their ultimate motive is to, say, maximize human happiness or something like that, or to be effectively altruistic that in a way that is completely impartial toward whether the person is friends with you or close to you or in your social network or whatever. I think they're pretending to have that motive. I don't think humans as social animals have that motive to be effective altruists. I don't think effective altruism is a motive that can evolve by natural selection. Any effective altruists among our ancestors would have been weeded out of the gene pool. They would have been replaced by strategic altruists who selectively helped their friends, their exchange partners, their family members, their mates, their allies, and did not help anyone else, and even strove to hurt and deprive their enemies and their rivals and their competitors.
Let's slow this down a little, because I'm fascinated by this conversation of if true altruism actually exists. But what I noticed with all the clips I watch on YouTube and podcasts is that people kind of just dive in.
Yeah.
So let's just build this up from ground level here and explain this to me like I'm a 10-year-old.
Sure.
First of all, let's get our definitions of what effective altruism is and what sort of true altruism as a concept means.
Yeah. Okay. So I think of effective altruism as trying to maximize the benefits that you provide to others, independent of the identity of those others. And I think that kind of altruism is something that cannot evolve by natural selection. Altruism can only evolve in very specific circumstances where the altruism is benefited in some way, where the benefits that the altruist is heaping out in some way or in some form come back to the altruist in terms of increased fitness. If altruists didn't get more stuff, have more mating partners, gain more resources than non-altruists, well, then we wouldn't have any altruists today, would we? Right? In order for a trait to evolve, it has to outcompete other traits. It has to do better than them. It has to gain more stuff, more status, more mates, more resources, whatever, in order for that trait to get selected for, in order for it to become a part of human nature. So we are not descended from the effective altruists who wanted to benefit the species, right? Species-level altruism is ultimately the type of thing that cannot evolve. We are descended from the altruists who helped others in ways that ultimately increased their survival and reproduction. So our altruism is very specific, very selective, very strategic. Now, at the same time, I like effective altruism. I think we should be more effective in our altruism. But I think it is also helpful to be realistic about human psychology and about the motives that we're bringing to the table. I ultimately see effective altruists as doing a more convoluted kind of virtue signaling than non-effective altruists, but it's still virtue signaling. They're still trying to signal that they are well-intentioned, noble, altruistic, smart, reasonable people to their fellow effective altruists, to the people in their nerdy subculture. Effective altruists gain status in their subculture for being effectively altruistic, and that is ultimately what is driving their behavior. And I think if we want to increase the amount of effective altruism in the world, we need to be aware of that, and we need to be realistic about how effective altruism is incentivized. Because if we don't have a clear-eyed understanding of how it works, we can never hope to increase the amount of it in the world, which I think we should try to increase.
Okay, let's balloon this up a little bit.
Yeah.
Is love thy neighbor an evolutionary byproduct for survival, and it's altruism in and as far as it benefits you and your immediate family.
At the end of the day, yeah, there's no other way for altruism to evolve except in cases where it benefits you and your family. If you're defining an altruist that pays a cost to benefit others, that lowers their biological fitness to increase the biological fitness of someone else who doesn't share their genes, you are defining something that is being selected against by natural selection, by definition.
What about love? Do you think love's evolved for our own sake?
Of course. I mean, if you think about romantic love, it's quite obvious that we have monogamous pair bonds where we cooperate with a member of the opposite sex to raise a family, to invest in children, and of course, human children are extremely dependent on provisioning and investment from parents. Uniquely so, I think, in the animal kingdom. So children are enormous investments and require enormous amounts of time and energy and collaboration to provision. So. Yeah, I think romantic love has a pretty clear adaptive purpose of allowing two people's Darwinian fates to be intertwined in their progeny. So yeah, I think love confers powerful advantages to lovers, or otherwise it wouldn't exist. It wouldn't have evolved.
I guess with that, the thing that's so fascinating is why the qualia and the felt experience of love has evolved. Why that's a necessity. This whole idea, and I'm not expecting us to solve it in this conversation, but of consciousness existing and being felt. It makes complete sense for love to have evolved to pass on the gene and to invest in people and blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't feel like the qualia and the felt sense of love is a necessity or consciousness in any form.
Yeah. Well, you're opening up a huge can of worms here.
I am indeed. You're welcome.
Which I'm happy to delve in and eat those worms. Yeah, you're talking about consciousness, the riddle of consciousness. Why aren't we robots? Why aren't we unconscious automata? If you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It seems like, an unconscious robot that did all the things that humans do, that, competes for status, has sex, cares for offspring. You could program an unconscious robot to do those things and do it completely unconsciously. Why aren't we unconscious robots? It's hard to think of a Darwinian reason why there should be anyone home in our heads, so to speak, why the lights should be on, why it should feel like anything to mate with someone or raise a family with someone. It's a huge question. As it just so happens, I have been thinking about it a lot. And I think we're asking the wrong question. I think rather than asking why consciousness evolved or how you can get felt experience from mere neurobiological activity, we should be asking why consciousness seems so puzzling, why it seems like there's a gap between felt experience and neurobiology. That is ultimately a psychological question. It's an evolutionary psychological question. Why do we have these intuitions that there is some incompatibility between mechanism and feeling, between a network of neurons that can process information and an emotion or a taste or a sight? And that, I think, is the key to unraveling this mystery. It's almost a meta-mystery of why it seems like a mystery. And so that's the approach that I've been taking to this problem. I think in order to solve it, we have to think about why it appears to be a problem. And the solution that I'm hitting on is that it's a byproduct of the structure of human cognition. So we have two rival systems in the mind. One system involves imagination, imagining potential experiences, empathizing with another person's experience. I might imagine what you're feeling. Episodic memory. I might have a rich memory of what an experience was like in the past. I might anticipate what's going to happen and simulate what that's going to be like. You notice I'm using this phrase, what it's like. This is the phrase that philosophers use to describe consciousness. Thomas Nagel famously posed the question, what is it like to be a bat? And he, and his argument was that no matter how much bat neurobiology we master, we'll never know what it's like to be a bat echolocating. And so I think it's no coincidence that we use this language, what it's like, to refer to what we imagine, what we remember, what we empathize with. If I am having a hard time empathizing with you, I might say, I can't imagine what it's like. It turns out that there's a lot of interesting neuroscience research that shows that all of these abilities, imagination, episodic memory, empathy, that these are all bundled together in the brain. This is known as the default network of the brain, where our brain naturally goes when we're just kind of spacing out without a task, right? And they're all kind of networked together. They come online in similar times. And what's interesting is that there's another system in the brain known as the task positive network, and this is the network that comes online when we're doing things, when we're trying to use means end reasoning, when we're tinkering with a tool and we're trying to figure out how a system works. This is the task positive network, and this is the network that we use when we're doing science. Right? We try to understand the brain in terms of as a physical system, in terms of cause and effect. It takes in inputs and it produces outputs. This is very much engaging the task positive network. I think it likely evolved for reasoning about objects, about means and ends, about, it evolved for using tools and planning complex courses of action. And what's interesting is that there is an antagonism in the brain between these two systems. There is a conflict such that when one system comes online, the other system gets suppressed. If I'm empathizing or imagining what it's like to experience something, my task positive network is going to be suppressed. Likewise, if I'm thinking about tools and functions and physical systems, my default mode network is going to be suppressed, right? And because our minds are arranged this way, because our minds evolved this way, it makes it really difficult for us to understand the evolution of consciousness. And it makes sense that we would have this kind of division because I don't want to treat my loved ones as objects to be manipulated, right? We think about a manipulative person like a psychopath who thinks of their loved ones that way. You don't want to empathize with your enemy or with your rival. You don't want to empathize with the prey that you're hunting. Otherwise, you'll never throw a spear at the thing to kill it. Right. And so we need these separate systems. If we started empathizing with our tools, that would be a catastrophe for biological fitness. So I think there are really good evolutionary reasons why these two systems should be in conflict. And once you recognize that, well, you can start to see why it seems like consciousness is mysterious. When we try to explain X in terms of Y, we imagine all the different scenarios involving X and Y, and we see if they're correlated, right? If I think it's the pavement is wet because it's rained, I imagine different possible worlds where it might be wet, but it hasn't rained, or it rained, but it wasn't wet, and we think about the correlation between those two events. So this is research by Ted Quillian looking at causal cognition. When we think about X as a cause of Y, we imagine those two things, and we imagine whether they're correlated across counterfactual worlds, right? But when we think about whether brain activity causes consciousness, we're in deep trouble because the thing that we're trying to explain drops out as soon as we try to explain it.
Yeah.
Right? So if I'm trying to explain consciousness in terms of brain activity and I'm trying to see whether those two things are correlated in counterfactual worlds, well, as soon as I start thinking about brain activity, consciousness gets suppressed. And as soon as I start thinking about consciousness, well, neurobiology gets suppressed. And so it's going to seem like there is an unbridgeable gap between these two things. But that seeming is actually an illusion. It's a byproduct of the way our brains are organized. So I actually don't think that there is a deep mystery of consciousness that exists in the world. I think the mystery only exists in our heads.
It's like trying to take a picture of your iPhone without a mirror.
Yeah.
You just can't do it. I feel like we're answering the easy problem of consciousness here. How the systems work, how someone can be sleeping but unconscious, how the processing could actually work. But we're not answering the hard problem of consciousness here, which is how do, in a materialist world, these atoms of consciousness add up to form this conscious experience? That's the hard problem.
Yeah. Sure. So the philosopher David Chalmers coined this term hard problem of consciousness, and it's the explanatory gap between physical stuff and conscious stuff, between neural activity and felt experience. But what's interesting is that David Chalmers also coined a different phrase called the meta problem of consciousness, which is why it seems like there's a hard problem. And so I'm actually picking up where Chalmers left off. I'm trying to solve that meta problem of why it seems like there's a hard problem. And in my view, my solution to that meta problem actually solves the hard problem. It shows that the hard problem was never a problem. It only seems like there's a problem, right? There is no gap between neurobiology and felt experience. And I can get into the details of why it seems that way and what consciousness might actually be. So when you think about the conflict between these two systems in the head, between the default mode network, the empathizing, imagining network, and the task positive physical manipulation system. The difference between them is a kind of motivational oomph, a kind of imperative, a thing that literally physically compels my brain and body to do something, right? So if I shift from, say, my dog's discomfort to a chicken's discomfort, all of a sudden, I'm going to move from a position where I'm motivated to reduce the discomfort, or in the case of my dog, to a case where I'm actually not motivated to reduce the chicken's discomfort at all, right? And what I'm doing is I'm moving from one system that empathizes with my dog, and I'm dropping that system out and moving to understanding the chicken in mechanistic terms. And what's dropping out is the motivational force of the dog's discomfort. In one case, I'm physically compelled to alleviate it. In one case, I'm not. So I think the big thing at the heart of what we talk about as consciousness is that motivational force, that imperative, that oomph. That, I think, is the key ingredient to what consciousness is. And I think the aspects of consciousness that are most puzzling to us, that seem most problematic, are the aspects that are most infused with motivational force. So if you ask people what's puzzling about consciousness, or what types of states is a robot unlikely to have, it inevitably focuses on pain. Pain seems to be the most problematic in terms of physical processes, because pain is perhaps our most powerful felt motivational imperative. So I think the key ingredient to consciousness that we're overlooking is that motivational force, and that motivational force that's infused with the information that we're picking up from the environment with our sense organs. And once you fuse that information about what's happening in the world with a felt motivational force, I think that is what we're talking about when we talk about an experience.
David Eagleman says, your brain collects up all the information from the senses before it decides upon the story of what happens. The strange consequence of all of this is that you live in the past. How does that land with you?
Yeah, no, it's certainly true. So it takes I forget how many milliseconds it takes from a neuron firing in my foot to reach my brain. It's certainly non-zero. It doesn't happen instantaneously. There's a lag between what happens down at my foot and what I experience. So in a certain sense, we are experiencing something that is, some number of milliseconds in the past, just by virtue of the speed at which electrical impulses can be sent through a nerve. So I agree with it in that sense. And I think there's a deeper sense in which we are living in the past, and in which that living in the past is unnerving or disorienting. And that's that our memories are biased in all sorts of ways. So our memories are not like a video recording. They're not faithfully capturing everything that happened. They're filtering it in all sorts of ways that we're unconscious of. And every time we remember something, we are distorting it more and more and more. Because every time we remember something, our goals and agendas in the moment of remembering will bias the parts of the memory that we are accessing. And it strengthens those aspects of the memory that are relevant to our goal in that moment. And so the next time we remember it, it's going to be affected by the last time we remembered it, because the parts of the memory that were useful the last time we remembered it are going to be more readily, they're going to be come to mind more readily the next time. So there's a sense in which there's a lag between our senses and our experience. But there's also a sense in which memory itself is putting some distance between us and the world itself. So, yeah.
I wonder how much emotion dictates everything we logically do. There's this concept of the elephant and the rider from Jonathan Haidt in The Righteous Mind. The idea that you've got an elephant, and that's your unconscious mind, your emotional mind, and you've got the rider on top, that's your conscious, logical, reasoning mind.
Yeah.
And the rider's on top thinking he's in complete control, he can take this elephant wherever he wants. And that's true. Until the elephant wants to go in a different direction to him. So with all of this and how we distort our memories, it seems to me like the superpower here is storytelling and the stories that we want to tell ourselves, the narratives we want in our lives. Because the clearer that is, the more easily we're going to be able to distort our memories towards that story we want. How does this play into everything, this storytelling narrative arc of our lives? And importantly, do you think we're losing that or gaining that in excess now in 2025?
Interesting question. So I agree that we see the world through a kind of storytelling filter. We think in stories, we feel in stories, we communicate in stories. You can think of a story as the stickiest kind of information, the information that is most easily accessible to a human brain.
What do you mean?
Well, a story has a very clear causal structure. X happens, that leads to Y, which leads to Z, and that either fulfills someone's goal or it doesn't. That kind of structure is something that we are innately interested in because that's useful in helping us learn from each other. So if you do something and it causes your arm to get cut off, that's very important information for me to learn from so that I don't get my arm cut off. And so we're constantly scanning the world for story-like structures because those are the types of structures that we can most easily learn from. X caused Y, and that was either good or bad for someone. That's basically the structure of a story. And you can think of stories as concatenations of X causes Y, which was good or bad for this person, which led to this, which led to that, which was good or bad for so-and-so for such and such reasons. So yeah, that's the way I'm sort of understanding stories, is that they're just kind of a sticky information structure, which explains why we think in stories and why we communicate in stories. Will Storr, who's I'm a fan of, has written a lot on the storytelling brain and on social status and how storytelling and status have been intertwined. The question of whether we have an abundance of stories or whether we need more stories. It's an interesting question. I'm not sure I know the answer. I think in some ways we're definitely oversaturated with stories and that we're bombarded with them 24/7. Our phones are filled with them. We've never had access to more stories than ever before. And we've never had such power to choose the exact types of stories that are most congenial to our interests. It used to be, I mean, even just a few decades ago, everyone would watch the same shows. There were only a few networks, and everyone would know what happened in the latest episode of I Love Lucy or whatever. There was a kind of cultural common ground from having such few options. Now there are so many options. We just live in a bewilderingly nichified media environment where what I'm consuming 9 times out of 10 is not going to be the same thing that you're consuming. And we're going to have much less common ground. Now, I might have more common ground with the few weirdos who consume what I'm consuming. And in some sense, that might lead to more social belonging. So I'm not sure. I mean, it can be a blessing that it allows weirdos to associate and find each other and form communities of like-minded weirdos. It's never been easier in the history of humanity for groups of weirdos to find each other. On the other hand, it can be bewildering and disorienting to have such little common ground with so many people. So yeah, I don't know. I don't have a very confident answer in that question one way or the other.
Why do you think we find shows like Curb Your Enthusiasm funny?
Well, you're touching on another topic that I've thought a lot about, which is humor. I'm actually working on an evolutionary theory of humor. Curb Your Enthusiasm. I love Curb Your Enthusiasm. It's one of my favorite shows. I think what episodes of Curb Your Enthusiasm revolve around are kinds of social awkwardness, kinds of social faux pas, social mix-ups or confusions. And Larry David often puts himself into the situations that are most cringy and humiliating. And he ends up having like various misunderstandings where he exaggerates a faux pas and thinks it's like the worst transgression that has ever been inflicted on him, right? And so what I think humor is about these kinds of social mix-ups and faux pas. You can think of the simplest kind of humorous mix-up as two people trying to pass each other in a narrow hallway. They each have two options, go left or go right. If they go in opposite directions, they gain a benefit, they pass each other and make it to their respective destinations. But there's a mix-up that can happen here. And we've all been in this situation where you sort of dance back and forth with someone trying to pass them and you're failing to coordinate and align your behavior for mutual benefit. And I think that's what humor is. It's a failure to coordinate. It's a failure to align our behaviors and mental states with other people or with our broader culture. And I think it's no coincidence that we laugh when we're in that situation where we're struggling to pass someone in a hallway. But I think we also laugh when we're mixed up about all sorts of things in our environment, when we're mixed up about what roles we should be playing in a social interaction. If I think you're a leader when you're actually a follower, or you think I'm a high status person when I'm actually a low status person, that can be a kind of humorous and catastrophic mix-up that it would be very important for us to detect and avoid. You can think about mixing up, the various roles we have with ages and genders, mistaking, a child for an adult. A child that acts like an adult can be very funny. There's that movie Boss Baby about a baby that acts like a CEO boss. Gender bending is obviously, there are tons of comedies about that. Tootsie and Some Like It Hot. Mixing up racial groups like white chicks when the Wayans brothers dress up as white chicks. When in Ace Ventura, When Nature Calls, people are mixed up between an adult man and a newborn of a rhinoceros when he's hiding out in a mechanical rhino and he has to break free from the rhino. So I think humor is about these kinds of mix-ups and misunderstandings that are kind of tempting and easy to fall prey to, and also very socially or physically costly in some way. And the reason why it's rewarding to detect these kinds of mix-ups and laugh at them is because it's really useful to avoid those kinds of mix-ups and faux pas in the hypersocial contexts in which we find ourselves. And I think the main function of laughter is to diffuse those costs. If we have a misunderstanding about the meaning of the phrase hook up with, let's say you think hook up with means meet up with, and I think hook up with means have sex with. That's a coordination game. And you might say, I hooked up with your mom last night. That would be a pretty catastrophic mix-up. And I noticed you laughed when I said that, which is, I think, evidence for the theory. If we have that kind of a mix-up, we need to create common knowledge that there was a mix-up. I need to know that you know that I know that there was a misunderstanding there, right? If maybe I'm aware that you didn't sleep with my mom, but if I don't know that you know that I know that, then you might still be, you want to avoid me and be afraid that I'm going to be hostile toward you, and that could threaten our relationship. So we each need to know that the other one knows that the other one knows, and so on ad infinitum, that there was a mix-up. And the way we create that common knowledge is by laughing together, by sharing laughter. When we share laughter, we create common knowledge that I know there was a misunderstanding, you know there was a misunderstanding, I know that you know that I know, you know that I know that you know, and so on. And I think that's the function of shared laughter, and that's why it can often be uncomfortable when you're laughing at something and it's not being reciprocated by the other person. That shows that whatever social costs you think have been inflicted are not being diffused. They're not acknowledging that there was a mix-up or a misunderstanding. And so I think there's all sorts of intricacies and complexities here regarding coordination, mix-ups, creating common knowledge, diffusing the costs of mix-ups. I have a whole paper on this. I'm happy to talk more about it, but that's the gist of how I'm thinking about it.
Well, I wonder why then, if laughing is a way to showcase that I know that you know that I know that you know.
Yeah.
Why haven't we just evolved to be better communicators, to cut fat from our sentences? I say as I fuck up my words twice, but also to articulate what's in our mind constantly. So instead of you saying that you hooked up with my mum, and me laughing to show you that I know that you know that I know that wasn't the case.
Yeah. Why
haven't I evolved to just give you a super autistic, bland, boring response and go, I know you didn't hook up with my mum?
Right.
Surely that's more plausible.
Well, no, because you can say that, but maybe you're denying it. Maybe you're trying to wriggle out of your transgression. If you just say it once, maybe I don't believe you. It's more complicated than just verbally expressing that there's a mix-up. That's not enough to create common knowledge a lot of the time. And so I think the solution that evolution hit on is co-opting what many animals use as a play signal. So chimpanzees, when they wrestle with each other and practice fighting with each other, emit a kind of panting sound that is very reminiscent of human laughter. And plenty of animals have these kinds of play signals. Rats apparently laugh when you tickle them. They emit a kind of ultrasonic panting that's kind of reminiscent of the way that chimpanzees pant and the way humans laugh. So I think play signals are very common in a wide variety of species because play is such an important thing to do to practice the skills that are relevant to your survival and reproduction. But if you're going to play, you need to know that it's play. You need to know that it's not real. If we're play fighting, I need to know that you know that I know that I'm not really trying to hurt you. And you need to know that I know that I'm not really trying to hurt you, right? Otherwise, we could never have the play fight, right? And so we have this play signal and we have this play emotion that we might call mirth or amusement. And this is a kind of state where all the negative emotions are sort of deactivated. So if we're play fighting, it would be really bad if I got mad at you for the punch that you pretended to throw at me, right? It would be very bad if I got afraid that you were trying to kill me. It would be very bad if I felt like really guilty and compassionate and empathetic when I, pretended to hurt you or whatever. And so when we're play fighting, all these negative emotions of guilt, of sympathy, of anger, of fear, they all get deactivated so that we can successfully engage in the play fight. And I think what evolution did is it co-opted that signaling system and that emotional system in the case of the various complicated social mix-ups that we fall prey to in our day-to-day life. And so when we laugh, we are emitting an ancient play signal that is basically saying, I'm not taking this seriously right now. I'm not treating this as actual communication. I'm not going to feel anger at the fact that you say had sex with my mother, right? Because my anger is being deactivated literally in my brain, right? And so when we share laughter, when we share this emotional state of mirth, we each know that the other one knows that the other one knows that we're in a playful state where the negative emotions are not active, and we know that we're not taking this seriously. And so I think that's the solution that evolution hit on to help us diffuse the various mix-ups and misunderstandings that we continually fall prey to every day. And if we were unable to diffuse those costs and create common knowledge of these mix-ups and misunderstandings, we would never have evolved to collaborate and cooperate and work together in the extraordinary ways that we have evolved to. So I think humor is crucial to our hypersocial linguistic way of life. It could not be possible without an ability to detect these kinds of misunderstandings, to find the detection rewarding, and to find the diffusion of their costs rewarding.
Well, speaking about evolution solving mix-ups, speak to me about evolutionary mismatches and the biggest ones we're facing in 2025.
Well, we evolved in a very different environment than the one we currently inhabit. Evolutionary psychologists have written a lot about this. I mean, perhaps Some of the most obvious ways in which this is true involve contraception. So there was no contraception in ancestral environments. And so now in modern environments, we are able to have sex without bearing the reproductive consequences. And so in many ways, our minds are not evolved for this new reality in which we find ourselves. If my spouse cheats on me with someone else, it doesn't matter if she used contraception, right? From a Darwinian perspective, it would matter hugely because, there's no risk of me, fathering another person's offspring. But from a perspective of, my mind evolved in the Stone Age before contraception, I'm going to be just as betrayed and just as hurt by the affair, regardless of whether contraception was used or not, because our sexual jealousy evolved in a context where that variable just did not exist, right? And so we did not evolve to be sensitive to that variable. So that's one classic case of mismatch. People have talked about other cases of mismatch where high caloric, sugar and fat dense foods were scarce in ancestral environments, and they're bountiful in modern environments, which is why we gorge ourselves on sweets and fatty foods. That's another classic example of mismatch. What are the kinds of mismatches that are plaguing us right now? It's a complicated question. I think in some ways, we are too attentive to social alienation and social rejection. Because in ancestral environments, if you were rejected by your community or frowned upon or looked down upon or viewed as low status, that would be something pretty close to a death sentence, right? If you were exiled from the group, that's pretty much the same as being dead if you're in a hunter-gatherer group that depends on cooperation and division of labor to meet your basic needs. If you're simply viewed as low status, that's going to shut you out of the mating market because one of the main things that people look for in a mate is social status, whether they're respected or admired by other people in the community. No one wants to marry a social pariah. So in many ways, in ancestral environments, the consequences of social rejection would have been so much larger than they are now. If I'm, say, rejected in the modern environment, or if I'm viewed as low status in the modern environment, that is not going to have the same kind of consequence to me as it would have. If I am excluded, I may still be able to survive. If I still have a job, I'm still making money, I can still afford to meet my basic needs. It doesn't matter if people, make fun of me, I can still eat. And even if I'm kind of seen as a loser or a weirdo with our huge nicheified environment, I'm very likely to find other weirdos and losers like me and, find friends in that group of weirdos and losers and mates in that group. And so being viewed as a weirdo or a loser is going to feel much worse than it actually is in objective reality. I think our social anxiety is way out of whack with where it needs to be in the modern world. I think it made sense to have extreme social anxiety in the ancestral environment where social exclusion was tantamount to death. In the modern environment, I don't think that much social anxiety makes sense. And so if I could tweak one aspect of the human brain that I think is poorly adapted to modern environments, I would turn down the social anxiety. Of course, it's easier said than done. Merely being aware of this fact does not make the social anxiety go away. Believe me, I've tried to make it go away. It doesn't. But maybe, just maybe, it can lower it a little bit or give you a little bit of perspective on it.
What do you think to the idea? I've been playing around with this, and I was speaking to Chris Williamson about this recently. This sort of genetic, sexual preference, political seppuku of liberals, especially, the data shows, not wanting to have kids more often than conservatives do. And more importantly than that, really, it's not about wanting to have kids or not wanting to have kids, because most people still want to have kids. It's living lives that actually allow you to have kids before your fertility window closes, both for men and women.
Yeah.
The new liberal lifestyle of boss bitch, penthouse and a poodle, or male Bugatti driver, whatever it may be, it doesn't lend itself to having kids and passing on your gene.
Yeah.
you're going to reach a point where you eventually are ready to stop having your fun. You're going to settle down, but it's too late. And the stat that I keep on quoting about this that just blew my mind was Stephen J. Shaw's research on this, how now it's dropped to age 28, at which a woman in the West has about a 50% chance of ever going on to have kids because of biological factors, social factors, whatever else, just not getting on to having any kids. And for men, it's 30. I wonder what's going to happen in the next 200 years. Are people that don't have a strong family unit and who are just caught up in this whirlwind of social media and more freedom, which is great, are they just going to select themselves out of history and die out, and we're just going to be ruled by sort of religious organizations?
Unfortunately, I think that is plausible. It's one of the things that really worries me about the future of our species. Evolution has not stopped. It never stops. It's happening right now. There's variation in reproductive success right now in the modern world, and there are behaviors and ways of life that are being selected for right now in the modern world. And judging by the current data, the things that are being selected for are, by many people's standards, not the sort of things that we would want to be selected for. You mentioned religiosity. It's true that religious groups, particularly religious fundamentalist groups, have higher reproductive success than secular groups. Does that mean that we are evolving to be religious fundamentalists? I don't know. It's almost like there's a race between cultural evolution and biological evolution, where cultural evolution is going in one direction and biological evolution is going in a different direction. Culturally, we're getting much more secular, much less religious, much more educated. And of course, atheism and non-religion and education are all negatively correlated with fertility, such that people who are more highly educated and less religious tend to have fewer kids. So culturally, we're drifting towards, greater knowledge, greater education, greater secularism. But biologically, the opposite is happening. And I really don't know which one is going to win. In the long run, I think biology is going to win. But what happens until then is anyone's guess. How the world is going to change, how technology is going to change things. There's just so much uncertainty about what the future holds for us that I really can't make confident predictions one way or the other. I can say that the current trajectory of fertility is worrying, and it is going to have consequences in a few generations. That it's already happening in South Korea, where they're below replacement fertility. Their population is literally about to be cut in half because they're averaging about one kid per couple. So they're about to see their population cut in half. Populations are going to become more lopsided, such that there are more old people per young person. That I can't imagine is going to be a good thing, to have our populations filled with elderly people who need to be cared for, and to have a scarcity of ambitious and productive young people who create the wealth that will inevitably allow us to care for those elderly people. It's worrying. I have a post that takes kind of a bleak view toward the human future called Mediocrity as an Existential Risk. And the idea there is that I think we focus too much on apocalypses and on, the world ending with a bang, and we pay too little attention to possibilities where the world sort of slowly fizzles out or ends with a whimper or just gradually just gets shittier and shittier and more mediocre. And I explore that idea, and unfortunately, I see a lot of signs that we might be headed in that direction. I wish I had something more hopeful to say, but it's just something that we need to be aware of and we need to think about. It's a problem that we need to put our collective minds to. And unfortunately, I don't have the answers. I'm just one mediocre primate.
Well, the problem there that's so perfectly illustrated with mediocrity being our downfall is this carbon monoxide gas effect of something like depopulation, where it's a slow burner and you don't see that it's even really happening because the populations appear to be growing just from aging, and then it hits you in the face and it's exponential decline. As well as that, the solutions aren't sexy. I mean, to tell people we need to boost our fertility rates and we need to hunker down early on, not prioritizing education or business or all of these easier signals of status, that's incredibly difficult. And I see this, I mean, I put my episode out with Stephen J. Shaw about a month ago now. It's the most viewed episode I've ever put out. And it's literally just thousands and thousands of hate comments. There are loads of constructive ones too, but people really, really get angry when you touch on this.
Sure.
They like to say, the world's a shitty place anyway. Why would I bring kids into it?
Yeah.
Or they take the route of being openly selfish and going, no, I want to live my life. I don't want to live for someone else.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I'm pessimistic. I certainly do think that there's a strong contingent of people that just don't want to have their minds changed. And I don't know if it's worth spending time trying to convince them rather than just providing resources and information for those people that do say they want kids and making them aware of the fact that if they're too late, which actually is very early by their standards, they're not going to be able to have kids.
Yeah, no, I agree with you that I don't think we're going to solve this problem by talking our way out of it. No matter how compelling of an argument you present, no matter how clear the data are, people want what they want. And as I said earlier, people don't want to maximize their biological fitness per se. They want the sorts of things that would have maximized their fitness in ancestral environments before contraception existed. What they want are things like sex and status. And if they can get those things without having kids, then they often will get those things and they will make that choice. And they will be mad and upset for people who try to shame them for making that choice. And I understand why they would be. It's a very tricky and complicated issue.
I wonder if depopulation and the fertility crisis is the biggest example of an evolutionary mismatch that we're facing en masse.
It may well be. I think that's plausible. And in terms of figuring out what to do about it, again, I agree that we can't talk our way out of it. I think to bring it back full circle, we need to change the incentive structures. The way to solve it is to change the incentives for having large numbers of kids. And I think probably the biggest drivers of low fertility in the Western world are educational credentialism, the need to get a more and more advanced degree to gain more and more years of schooling to be competitive in the job market, and ballooning housing prices. That is, as it becomes more expensive to have kids, to have a home, to achieve the level of education necessary to be competitive in the job market, it becomes more and more difficult and undesirable to have kids. In order to have kids, you have to have a place to put them. You have to have a place to live with them in. And if you can't afford a house that is big enough for a spouse and multiple kids, then you're just not going to have a family. You can't have a family without a house. So figuring out how to solve the housing crisis, I think, would go a long way toward bringing fertility up. I think rethinking our obsession and cultural addiction to education would also go a long way. I'm a big fan of the economist Brian Kaplan's book, The Case Against Education, where he argues that we have too much education. And it's a colossal waste of time and money. We are taking the most energetic, youthful people who are in the prime of their life, who are, optimally ambitious, and we are forcing them to memorize useless garbage that they're going to forget the moment they leave the classroom. We are having them jump through arbitrary hoops to signal their desirability in the labor market. And because everyone is jumping through those same hoops, everyone is at the same position they started at, and they've wasted a ton of time and money jumping through those hoops.
Yeah, it's like everyone's standing up at the cinema for a better view.
Exactly. It's a perfect analogy. It's a race to the bottom, as the economist Robert Frank called it. So I think if we can pull those levers of education and housing, that would go a long way. Of course, how to solve those problems is another complicated question. In the end, I'm just one mediocre primate. I don't have all the answers, but those are my best guesses about how to approach the problem.
David, thank you so much for coming on the show. We'll head over to Substack to answer some of the people's questions watching. But first, where can people find more of your work?
So they can find my blogging at my blog, Everything is Bullshit. You can find it at everythingisbullshit.blog. You can find me on Twitter at David Pinsof. And you can check out my podcast on evolutionary psychology with Dave Petrozewski. It's called Evolutionary Psychology, in parentheses, the podcast. And you can find that at any podcast platform.
And heading over to Substack, where David's going to answer your questions.